Welcome to part 2 of the Motorcycle Action Group UK. In the last video I was talking to you about some of the reasons that hold back the adoption of electric cars, and I mentioned 3 of those being price, range and charging, and I said that there was a 4th issue, and I just ran out of time in the last video, so let's get straight into it. The 4th issue that I see is depreciation. When you buy a new car and you drive it off the lot, it depreciates almost immediately, and it depreciates a little bit over the next couple of years, and then after about 3 years it is worth somewhere between about 45 and 55% of the original purchase price. After that, the depreciation continues until it's worth next to nothing. What is happening at the moment in regard to electric vehicles is that they are depreciating at a much faster rate, or they are worth much less upon turnover at 3 or 4 years than combustion engine vehicles, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One reason is that the manufacturers of electric vehicles are discounting the price. Now the GWM Aura, for example, has been discounted by something like $4,000. Some cars in the MG range have been discounted about $5,000, and so what happens then is, of course, those people who've already bought a car, their car is automatically devalued by the amount of discount that the manufacturer has now applied to the unsold stock. Now, the manufacturer doesn't care that your car is worth $4,000 or $5,000 less than you thought it would be, because you've already paid them and they've already got their money. They just want to sell more cars, and they want to sell the ones that are on the lot, and the only way to sell them if they're not selling them is to discount the price. Tesla have done the same thing because they want to maintain market share, and they've got cars that they're not selling, so they discount the price. And as I say, it automatically devalues the cars that are currently on the lot, that have already been bought. The second reason that there is higher depreciation, or higher than combustion engine vehicle depreciation on electric vehicles, is that people are allegedly reluctant to buy second-hand electric vehicles, and I believe that has something to do with fears about battery degradation. Now, it's true that over time the battery will degrade, and at some point it'll reach the point where it's no longer useful for purpose. There's no longer any point in trying to charge it because it won't take you anywhere. And of course the cost of replacing the battery is often more than what the vehicle is worth. In truth, as far as we know, the only vehicle manufacturer who has had significant issues with battery degradation has been Nissan, who decided to use an air cooling system for their batteries on the Leaf, whereas everybody used a much better liquid cooling system, and their batteries don't degrade at the same rate. However, there are people who feel that the battery is going to be degraded and it's not going to be any good, and it's going to conk out on me, and I'm going to have to put a new battery in it, so they won't buy a second-hand electric vehicle. We should note that, I think with the exception of Tesla, most electric vehicle manufacturers warrant their vehicles for somewhere between 5 and 7 years, and they generally give somewhere between 6 and 8 years warranty on the battery as a separate warranty from the rest of the vehicle. Now, be very careful and check the fine print and make sure that what applies to the vehicle, if you're going to buy an electric vehicle, what warranty applies and what it applies to. But generally the warranty on the battery is somewhere between 6 and 8 years and is separate to the warranty on the rest of the vehicle. So if, for example, somebody buys an electric vehicle and then after 3 or 4 years turns it over, then the second owner also gets the remains of the warranty, because the warranty is attached to the vehicle, not to the owner. So that fear about, the battery dying after 3 or 4 years does seem somewhat unwarranted. Now, when I was talking earlier about electric vehicles, I mentioned that there were some issues with Chinese vehicles, and I said I would address those. Let's be clear what I'm talking about here. There are 2 types of manufacturers in China. There are manufacturers like Kia and Tesla, for example, who make vehicles in China. There are companies like Mercedes, BMW and General Motors who have arrangements with Chinese companies to make cars for them. And then there are the Chinese manufacturers themselves, such as the brands I mentioned earlier, and others which are coming or promised to be coming to the Australian market. Now, there seems to be a perception that the Chinese-made vehicles, that is, vehicles made by Chinese companies, such as the brands I mentioned earlier, MG and so forth, are of some how of inferior quality to the vehicles made in China by other manufacturers. It seems odd to suggest that the people who work in one factory would have less training and less skill than the people who work in the factory just down the road, perhaps, since all the labour is Chinese. But the suggestion is that the Chinese manufacturers use poorer quality materials, that the build quality isn't as good, that the fit of various things isn't as good. That seems to be contradicted by almost every review that I have seen of a Chinese vehicle, from Watching Drive, Car Sales, Car Source, Cars Guide, Chasing Cars and Ludicrous Feet, who all say that the fit and finish and the materials used in Chinese vehicles is of good quality and has in some cases a luxury feel about it. Now, yes, you are buying a car at a price, but every car is made to a price and there are always compromises, and you are not going to get Rolls-Royce quality in an MG or an Aura. But nevertheless, the general consensus from all of those people whose job is to review vehicles and talk about the pros and cons, I have not heard any of them say the materials used are of poor quality, the fit and finish is of poor quality, and the car rattles and shakes and makes lots of ungodly noises while they're driving it. So I'm not sure how much of the concern about Chinese cars is based on perception and how much is based on reality. And I'm not by any means endorsing or suggesting you buy any brand. I'm just trying to present alternative views about things. Now, all of this business with electric vehicles, range, price, charging, depreciation is all relevant to electric motorcycles. But there are some separate issues related to motorcycling which are worthy of some discussion. It is rumoured, and Henry Ford is often quoted as having said, when he was asked what colour the Model T Ford came in, he said, "You can have any colour you want so long as it's black." Now, whether he actually said that or not, I'm not sure, but certainly a quote is attributed to him. It appears to be the case that the UK government is saying to motorcyclists, you can have any motorcycle you want so long as it's electric. Now, the problem with that, as far as the Motorcycle Action Group is concerned, the first big problem is the issue of freedom of choice. Some people say, I don't want an electric motorcycle. I want a motorcycle with a combustion engine and loud pipes and all the things that go with motorcycling as it is at the moment, and I don't want to be forced to have an electric motorcycle. In a free democratic society, they say, such as the United Kingdom, such as Australia, governments don't have the right to tell you what car you must drive. But in this case, the UK government is asserting, well, we want all of our vehicles to have, or our passenger vehicles, light passenger vehicles, to have no emissions at the tailpipe. And the only way to achieve that is to have an electric vehicle. And in my personal opinion, I don't particularly care how the vehicle I drive or ride is powered. I don't care whether the power is electric or petrol or diesel or some other fuel. I just enjoy riding motorcycles, and if the only option were an electric motorcycle and I could afford one when the time comes, then I would consider one. I was a two-wheeler and now I'm a three-wheeler, and I enjoy the three-wheelers and I feel much safer on that. I enjoy motorcycling, so I would not cut off my nose to spite my face and say, well, the government says X and I don't want to do X, so I'm never going to ride a motorcycle again. But that's another issue. So the issue of range, for example, well, before I address that, the issue of availability seems to be a big one, in that there don't seem to be a lot of models of electric motorcycles available. I did some research to see what models were available in Australia, and I found an article that quoted the 10 best electric motorcycles in Australia. Out of the 10, there were only 2 that I'd heard of. One was a Harley Davidson, which was $38,000, and the other was a BMW scooter, and it was $24,000. Both of those bikes had very limited range. When I say limited, about 150 to 190 kilometres. So there are no Hondas, there are no Yamahas, there are no Suzukis, there are no Kawasaki's, to my knowledge. Now, I'm sure that those manufacturers and others have got their research and development departments working away in laboratories coming up with versions of electric motorcycles, but at the moment there doesn't seem to be a lot of choice, whereas there does seem to be a lot of choice and an increasing amount of choice in regard to electric vehicles, electric cars, if that's what you want to buy. Now, the issue of range would be a big issue with a motorcycle, because whilst most people who ride a motorcycle may do a daily commute on it, the general appeal of motorcycles is that you jump on the thing on the weekend and you go off riding with your mates somewhere, and you ride for a couple of hours, and then you have lunch and you tell war stories about the olden days, and then you ride home. And you want to be able to ride 200 or 300 kilometres at a stretch. Then you want to have lunch and fire up your bike again and go. Now imagine if you've got a BMW scooter that has a range of about 150 kilometres. You get to where you want to go, but you first of all have to charge up somewhere on the way. Then you have lunch, and all of you and all of your friends have electric motorcycles, BMW's electric motorcycles, and you all want to charge them at the same time. The charging time is up to an hour, so by the time the last guy gets charged up, it's dark, and you've spent 4 or 5 or 6 hours standing around waiting for motorcycles to charge. So charging and range is a big issue. Now you might think, well, the solution to that is to simply shove a bigger battery into the motorcycle, and therefore you would get greater range. There are reasons why car manufacturers don't just shove big batteries into all their cars. The first one is, of course, cost. Batteries are expensive. They're big and they're heavy and they're expensive, and they cost a lot of money, and in order for the car to be sold at a certain price point, the battery has to be of a certain size to meet that price point. The second issue is the size and the aesthetics. Everything in your vehicle has to be proportionate to the overall dimensions of the vehicle. You don't put a 120 litre fuel tank in a Toyota Yaris, therefore you don't put a huge battery in a small hatchback. You would also not put a huge battery in a motorcycle for those reasons, and for others that I'll come to in a moment. So there's the proportionality and aesthetics of saying, well, we've got to fit a battery that fits in with the rest of the size of this vehicle. The third issue is weight. Batteries are heavy. Bigger batteries don't always equate with more range, and the reason for that is the bigger battery is heavier, therefore the vehicle is heavier, therefore more energy is required to just keep the vehicle moving rather than to extend its range. And so in the same way as a Toyota Corolla hybrid might return a 3.5 or 4 litres per 100 kilometre of fuel, and a Hilux truck might return 12, 15 litres of fuel per 100 kilometres or something like that. The same applies with electric vehicles. A smaller hatch might return 12 or 13 kilowatts per 100 kilometres, and a bigger car, even with a bigger battery, might return 15 or 20 kilowatts per 100 kilometres. More battery doesn't necessarily make for more range because it adds weight. And reducing weight is one of the reasons why, for example, most electric vehicles don't have a spare tyre or a spare wheel. They have a tyre repair kit because the spare wheel is dead weight. So in a motorcycle, everything's again got to be proportional. So the battery has got to be proportional to the size of the rest of the bike. It's also got to be weight conscious, because the appeal of a motorcycle is even big heavy ones like the 400 kilogram Kawasaki Vulcan Voyager that I used to ride. When it's up and on the road, it doesn't feel heavy. It feels quite light, and it leans into the corners, and you get that joy of going around the bends and zipping in and out of the traffic. Yes, it feels heavy when it's at low speed. If you put a big battery into a motorcycle, that battery is going to be heavy, and that heavy battery is going to affect the handling and dynamics and performance of the motorcycle, and therefore take away some of the joy that people get out of riding motorcycles. If you've never ridden one or been on the back of a motorcycle, you probably don't understand what it is, but everyone that rides a motorcycle will tell you that the joy is being able to ride along the highway at 100 kilometres an hour, being able to lean over as you go through curves, being able to move in and out of the traffic and filter at lanes and all that sort of stuff. And obviously if you have a big heavy bike with a big heavy battery, the dynamics of the motorcycle are going to be different. Now it's true that you could put the battery down low in the bike and therefore reduce the centre of gravity, because you don't have to have a fuel tank, and just like the battery in electric cars is generally on the floor in what's called a skateboard arrangement, so it looks like the deck of a skateboard, you could do something similar with the battery of an electric motorcycle, but you're limited by the wheelbase. You don't want a motorcycle that has a great big long wheelbase, a huge wheelbase, because then it's not effective as a form of transport getting in and out of the traffic and so on. So the issue of the dynamics of the motorcycle being affected by the size and placement of the battery is an issue. Now, that's not to say that these issues can't be solved. And I'm sure, as I said, that the manufacturers have all got people in their laboratories and research and development departments working on these issues. But at the moment, we don't have a great deal of models or a great deal of examples to look at and say, well, this is how the problem is going to be solved. One of the big issues with motorcycling is that motorcycling is a lifestyle. And for each niche of that lifestyle, there is a type of bike. So there are the people who ride cruisers. Now, for those who don't know what a cruiser is, it's a bike that looks like a Harley Davidson. So there are Harley Davidsons, there are Indians, and then there are the Japanese companies who make bikes that look like Harleys but aren't Harleys. And the people who ride those bikes because they want to say certain things about themselves, and there's a certain lifestyle goes with it. There are other people who ride what are called touring bikes. Those are things like the Honda Goldwing 1800, the BMW 1600, the Honda ST 1300 and the Yamaha FJR 1300 and so on. Those are bikes that you get on the road and you sit on them for hours, and they're very comfortable. They've got lots of luggage and all sorts of bells and whistles, and you can ride them a long way. Then there are what are referred to as the crotch rockets, or those little sports bikes that are high revving and very noisy, and you see them a lot zipping in and out of the traffic on the motorways and freeways, and you also see them flying around the bends on twisties and so on, and you're on a weekend trip, and they are entirely different to ride to a cruiser, and the people who ride them have a different sort of aspect about their motorcycling than the people who ride cruisers and so on. And of course, in all of that, there are also those people who ride scooters, and the little scooters from the 50cc to 125s right up to the maxi scooters of the Yamaha T-Max 550s and Suzuki Bergman 650s and so on. And all of those bikes, if they're going to be replaced by electric bikes, the designers need to come up with something that looks like what it's going to replace so that people will buy it. So there are some issues to be thinking about in regard to the future of motorcycling and what the Motorcycle Action Group are concerned about. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the commentary and all the scenery, and I'll talk to you when I'm preparing the next video.